successful ISVs and how their partnership with Microsoft has helped their business to succeed.
I'm finding it an amazing space where Microsoft can introduce us to elements of the market that we wouldn't have been able to get access to before.
The Microsoft relationship, it's not only been about technical support, but really helping us frame up that productization piece as well.
It's an amazing relationship. I'm really blown away. I wish they could come to every meeting that I go to.
Well, kia ora and welcome to Microsoft ISV Chats. Abel Wang is a senior cloud developer advocate, specializing in DevOps and Azure with a background in application development. Before joining Microsoft, Abel spent 7 years as a process consultant and a certified Scrum Master, helping customers globally develop solutions using agile practices and Team Foundation Server. He also has a lot of guitars, as you can see. Where he is sitting. Abel Wang, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Just one small correction, because I recently got promoted. So I'm actually a principal cloud advocate now and no longer senior.
Oh, well, congratulations from all of us. Maybe we should get a cake or something.
Or beer or wine.
That's great. I do apologize, but thanks for clearing that up for us. I mean, let's start just quickly with the guitars. It's
Sure.
not something you'd expect to see behind every DevOps expert, but how did the guitar thing come about?
I've been a musician all my life, and it's pretty much what I love. I really thought when I was growing up, I 100% thought I was going to be a rock star. Like, that was my sole plan in life, was to be a rock star. And I'm kind of shocked that I'm not. But yeah, I woke up one day, I flunked out of school, and I'm really hungry because I wasn't making any money. I was sleeping on my friend's couch, and it's kind of like, maybe I should go back to school because this rock and roll thing, although fun, wasn't working out so well. So, but music is still a huge part of my life.
Oh, that's great. Well, instead of a rock star in the musical sense, you're a rock star of the tech world. How did you get into the whole ISV area, the old DevOps area?
I've been writing code for what seems like forever. My mom's a computer science professor at the university. And so I grew up with computers my entire life. And she was just like, you are going to learn computer science. And I just went, I'm going to be a rock star. I don't know what you're talking about. But yeah, so that failed. But I went back to school, and I've been a coder. So I write code. And when I started writing code for real, I realized I really love it. I love music, but I love writing code too, because to me it's like a giant puzzle. You're given all these constraints, whether it's how much memory you can use, what language, what platform, things like that. But within the constraints, it's really up to you to do whatever you want, right? So I loved writing code. I thought it was amazing. And I'm pretty old, so I grew up like in the .com era. That was when I was first working. And during that time frame, man, you could wave your resume around and just, job offers would just fall out of the sky. So I hopped around a whole bunch of jobs, made a whole bunch of money. And then I started up my own software company as well. And we started up, we wrote some really cool software, and we ended up selling it. I was like, I'm a millionaire, never have to work again. And then I got my check, and it was not close to a millionaire at all. And I started crying a little bit because I was like, oh, I got to go back to work. But the fun part was there was enough money where I didn't have to pick up the next job, whatever it was, right? I could kind of pick and choose what I wanted to do. And I was really curious about why there were some projects that I was on that succeeded wildly. And there were other projects that just failed miserably. And actually, most of the projects that I've been on have failed miserably. And at first I wanted to say, oh, it's because of the developers, right? I was with either great developers or with horrible developers. But if you really look at it, the dev community is actually pretty small. And we would jump from company to company. So there was a lot of the same players wherever I went. And what I realized was what made me successful was not the developers around me, but the process that we used, right? So I kind of fell into the whole rabbit hole of what is the right process to run a software project. And I really started diving into Agile and Agile methodologies, and that totally made sense to me. As I was doing that, it kind of transformed from Agile and as an Agilist into DevOps, which I think is a natural progression. Because when you first start out, you have no idea if you're not even building the right software, right? You don't even build the right thing. It takes too long to build. Not only that, but you have too many bugs. So yeah, you don't even worry about like releasing and delivering. You just want to be able to create the right stuff. But then if you start doing Agile correctly, sprint after sprint, you can be successful. But the problem that I ran into after that was, great, as a dev team in an Agile team, we were successful, but we couldn't get our code into production fast enough, right? So this was right around the time when people started talking about DevOps and automation and all that. So it made sense to go from, as an Agilist, to go into DevOps as well, to say, how can we continuously deliver value, whatever that takes, whether it's running your software project correctly with Agile, or whether it's you need the automation of the automated builds and the automated releases, things like that. So it was a kind of a natural progression for me to go into the DevOps space. And once I hit the DevOps space, well, here I am.
Yeah, the rest is history, as they say. I mean, I like what you're saying, because this series is obviously aimed at ISVs in particular. And a lot of people have shared, I think, kind of a different version of what you're sharing with us today. And that is, you can have a great solution, but for lots of different reasons, you don't go to market well, and it just doesn't work as well as you thought or hoped that it would. Yeah. So many factors to think about when adopting DevOps, the culture, the tools. I mean, what should, in your opinion, ISVs really be focusing on?
The most important thing of all is always the culture. Whether you're an ISV or whether you're not, the culture is everything, right? I can have the right culture and I can have the wrong process and the wrong set of tools. I can still be successful. But if I have the wrong culture and I have the right process and the right tools, I'm still going to fail miserably, right? That's how important culture is. So you have to have that DevOps mindset in order to be successful, beyond a shadow of a doubt. I think the next important thing is you need to have a process that will let you iterate fast enough, yet still deliver code of high enough quality, right? It's super important to have the right type of process involved as well. And then finally, that's when I would look at tools or products, which is not what people want to hear, right? People want to just be like, oh, how do I buy DevOps? Show me the tool to buy, and then bam, magically we have DevOps. And it always makes me cringe a little bit when I hear that, because I'm like, that it just doesn't work that way. You have to address the culture first, and then you have to address the process, and then you can pick the tooling.
That's right. I mean, how does DevOps practices and culture differ, if at all, in the ISV space?
It's a little bit different, but the basic things are the same, right? Ultimately, if you think about DevOps, there's a million different definitions for DevOps, but just to frame this conversation, to me, DevOps is all about continuously delivering value to your end users, whatever that means, right? So if that's what's important, is continuously delivering value. When you look at how that applies to ISVs, if you're an ISV, you don't always own everything, right? Maybe you have your code in a source code repository, but you don't necessarily, it might not be your source code repository. It could be your client's. You might not own the tool chain. Somebody else might own it. You might not own the infrastructure. So you need to pay attention to that a little bit more, but the basic concepts are still exactly the same. You want to be able to continuously deliver value. So if that's the case, the same principles apply, right? You need to make sure you have the right DevOps culture. You need to make sure you have a process that's going to let you iterate fast enough, yet still deliver high enough code, high enough quality of code. And finally, you need to have the tools that can enable all of this, right? So you need to have automation. You need to be able to track your work. You need to have source control. You need to have all of that stuff. The specifics of what tooling that you need to use, that's probably the least important thing of all.
That's great. I mean, are there any special considerations or differences that ISVs should consider when adopting DevOps?
Again, culture is the most important, but for an ISV, it's important.
Sorry, guys, we might just have to redo that question again. Luke, your audio just froze there for a minute. Sorry, your video. So if we can just redo that question from the top, that'd be great, guys. Thanks.
Cool. Okay, here we go. Abel, are there any special considerations outside of what you've been sharing or differences that ISVs should consider when adopting DevOps?
I think you need to be a little bit more flexible when you're an ISV, because ultimately, like I said, you don't necessarily own everything. So for instance, there were times when I was working with clients and I couldn't control where my source code repository was sitting. Git is Git, right? But depending on the different repos, there are different tools that work better with that as well. There are some times when I didn't have control over the tool chain that I want to use. For instance, I love using GitHub Actions, but if my code is not in GitHub, I can't use that. I like using Azure DevOps Services to do my CI/CD, but if the companies that I'm working with, if that's not the tool chain they're working with, I might not have control over that where I can dictate that. So you do need to be a little bit more flexible as well. But then again, if you use the right type of DevOps techniques, it doesn't matter what tool sets you really use.
Yeah, that's great advice. Any standouts, DevOps? Sorry, we're coming back.
Hey, guys, I'm going to jump in again. Really sorry about this. We're just getting some technical difficulties at the moment. I'm just wondering if Abel, you or Luke have anything going on in the background? Are there any videos playing, or do you have other people in the house maybe on the Wi-Fi, or we're just trying to get a clean stream going?
It's weird. It's looking real clean in my end.
Is it?
Yeah, even Abel's stuff. I mean, I heard that audio stuff. It was just sort of almost pulsing in and out, but I'm not seeing any glitches or anything.
Right.
Yeah, I don't have anything open. Let me just make sure of that.
We'll just double check, guys. I'm sure we get it right the first time. Do you have, in the audio processing part, Luke, have you disabled the audio processing, or do you have it on?
Yeah,
like,
no, it's all off. Yeah. Is the audio not good? Hello.
Yeah.
The audio's good.
I'm just double checking everything. It's okay, Ryan. It's okay. Yeah. It was just a little bit. The image was pausing there. I'm just trying to make sure that we're all good before we continue. Abel, you don't have that audio button on that says disable audio processing there? No? Okay.
Yeah, I don't have anything processing right now.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we can try.
What's that?
Luke, are you hearing again?
Am I hearing? A little sort of pulse on your audio, which kind of just goes down a bit. But I don't think, from my perspective, it's too bad.
Oh, that's very weird. Hold on 1 second. Let me try changing something.
How are we going here, guys? Can you hear me, Abel? Or okay?
Sorry, Luke. Yeah, there was
I've
just a noise that came into your audio there for 30 seconds, but it's gone now. So why don't we roll, eh? Yeah, that noise is gone now. So I think we'll just go from that question. It's looking good now. All right.
So we got the last question though, eh?
Yeah, the last question was good. Yeah.
Abel, Dan's just asked here. He's just said he's keen to dig in more into continuous delivery of value.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? I mean, if I was to say that to you like that, I'm not a technical person.
Yeah.
So if I was to say to you, can you tell us more about the continuous delivery of value? Can you take it from there?
Yep, absolutely.
All right, let's go from there. All right. Abel, really keen to hear more about the continuous delivery of value. Could you expand on that for us, please?
Absolutely. So this is where I think a lot of DevOps practitioners kind of miss the boat, right? Because when you say DevOps, we immediately think CI/CD, because that's what's sexy, right? That's what's really exciting and what everybody wants to talk about. But DevOps, like I said, is all about continuously delivering value, whatever value means. So there are ways that I can continuously deliver value to my end users without even changing a line of code. So for instance, I know in the States, Amazon is a huge company, and we have like Black Friday sales where there's like huge discounts go on, and then like millions of people slam their websites trying to buy stuff all at once, right? So because of that, they have to scale their infrastructure up massively to meet the demands so that none of their web servers go down, so that people can keep on shopping, especially in the States. That's, I think, is an amazing example of delivering value without changing a line of code. What did they do? They scaled everything out. They scaled their infrastructure up. So by doing that, they're able to keep on still giving value to their end users. So it doesn't necessarily mean code. It doesn't even necessarily mean CI/CD. It's anything that is valuable for your end users. But of course, we do live in the software world. So ultimately, we like to think about value as, oh, we're giving you new features, right? But here's the other thing. Just because you're delivering feature after feature, sprint after sprint, it doesn't necessarily mean you're delivering value, right? Because ultimately, I can be delivering feature after feature that my end users hate. If that's the case, am I delivering value? Absolutely not, right? Or I could be delivering feature after feature, sprint after sprint, but it could be things that my end users don't even use at all. And again, if they don't use it, am I delivering value? So then it becomes really important for us if we're looking at, okay, we need to put out new features so we're delivering value to our end users. That's when we can look at things like when we want to gather telemetry. We want to know what is our service up or down? Is it that new thing we wrote, how are people using it? What's the performance like, right? Because if I can get that type of telemetry and I can figure that out, then I can start figuring out, am I delivering value, right? I mean, I can just write a brand new feature, and if nobody's using it, then I know I'm not delivering value. Or I have a brand new feature, but the performance is so bad that very few people use it, then I know we're not really delivering value, right? So it's important to figure out if you're delivering value or not. So one thing at Microsoft that we do, we used to think we were really good at figuring out what our customers and what our end users wanted. And we would conduct massive amounts of interviews. We would talk to all of our customers, and we thought we were really good at it until we started getting telemetry. And that's when we quickly realized we're really bad at guessing what our end users want. In fact, we're so bad at it, we are pretty much just at the same rate as everybody else, right? 30% of the time, we hit it out of the park, right? We have an idea and it's freaking awesome. Our end users love it. 30% of the time, the end user is kind of like, yeah, whatever, right? It's a new feature, but they don't care. So think about most of those features in Microsoft Word. There's a lot of features in there. I don't know what they do. I'm sure they're valuable, but I never touch it, right? So how much value are they? Yeah, whatever. And then 30% of the time, though, oh my goodness, we are so wrong. We think we hit like this is a great idea, but our end users are like, get rid of it or we're going to change software because it's so bad, right? So that's pretty much the industry standard, 30, 30, 30. But once we figured out that we were not amazing magicians that could just figure out what our end users needed, we started gathering telemetry. And what we started doing is, instead of just blindly guessing now, we can start a feature, gather the telemetry, see if we're really delivering value or not. And if we're not, we can abandon this feature really, really quickly, right? So we don't waste enough time. And then we can see the features that are getting traction and be like, oh, this is giving value, right? So let's start doubling down. For the next sprint, let's do more things like this. Or maybe we need to develop this feature more. So by doing that and doubling down on the types of features that we know are successful, our success rate is so much more now than 30, 30, 30. And telemetry is incredibly vital. It is really, really important to do that.
That's brilliant to hear, and it's something that obviously ISVs watching will want for their own organizations as well. I mean, is that something that Microsoft is able to implement in the partner organizations they're working with? How do you guys do that for other firms?
Well, when it's for other firms, it's a little bit more interesting because you have to tell them, or the agreements have to be in place that say, okay, we need to be able to gather telemetry to figure out if we're delivering value. And of course, then you have to make sure all the data is anonymous and all that stuff as well. When it's just our software, if it's just Office or Visual Studio or things that we're doing in Azure, it becomes much easier for us we can just throw in the telemetry and start gathering it. For an ISV writing software for another company, telemetry is still really important, but you have to navigate through that as well.
It's definitely something to be aware of, and it's great that you've pointed it out. So thanks for that. Let's move on. I mean, any standout DevOps techniques for building and running SaaS and/or multi-tenanted applications?
SaaS services. One DevOps technique that I think is incredibly important is using feature flags, right? So for our viewers that don't understand what a feature flag or don't know what a feature flag is, think of feature flags as a glorified if statement. So if my flag is on, run this chunk of code, and if the flag is off, run this chunk of code. So the way that we use it in software is if the flag is on, then run this new feature, and if the flag is off, then run the old feature, right? So by having feature flags, it gives you huge amounts of benefits. I cannot stress how important this is, right? One of the benefits it gives you is you now separate your release of your code from the deployment to when you actually release the feature. So your deployment is divorced from when you actually release the feature out in the wild. So I can deploy the code that has a new feature, but if my feature flag is off, nobody will see that. It's hidden behind that flag, right? So nobody knows that I've actually pushed this new code into production. So if I'm able to do that, right, if I have the ability to turn features on and off just on a whim, just super easy to do, whether it's through a configuration file or through database settings or whatever, this gives me the ability to, first of all, do trunk-based development where instead of having long living branches, I can dev pretty much right off my master branch, right? And that simplifies things tremendously. The other thing that it gives me is it gives me the ability to really make my deployments so much more safer, right? So in the DevOps world, we're pushing into deployment, we're deploying into production all the time, right? Maybe every 3 weeks, every 2 weeks, maybe even multiple times a day, maybe even hundreds of times a day, right? So by having feature flags, it gives me that added layer of protection where I can say, push the deployment out, but let's keep the feature flag off so it's the old code because I know that old code works. And then once it's already in production, I can say, turn the flag on, and if things go bad, it's okay because rollback is super easy. Rollback just means, turn the feature flag off really quickly, and then bam, you're okay, right? It gets reverted. So that's a really powerful technique. The other thing that we do often with our feature flags is it's not just binary, it's not just on or off. You can turn your feature on, your flag on for just a part of the people using your application, right? So maybe you can say something like, turn on the flag, but let's turn it on for maybe only, like 2% of our user base. And so then only a tiny portion will see the new code. And while they're using it, now you can start looking at the telemetry really carefully and make sure everything's still working correctly, right? And if you notice giant errors happening because of it, it's only happening to your 2%, 1%, whatever of your user base. You can quickly turn it off as well. you can also do things like testing in production, right? So if I have a flag on, I can turn my flag on, but only for my QA team. So nobody can see it except for my QA team, and they can test it while it's in production to make sure everything looks good, right? And then whenever I bring this up, somebody looks at me and starts screaming at me, "Are you crazy? Why would you possibly want to test in production? That sounds insane." And my answer to them is, it does sound insane, but we already test our code in production all the time. And the reason why we do that is because we don't have the ability to replicate a QA environment that is 100% the same as what's in production, right? If we are on-prem, it's almost impossible, because who has the money to have all that identical hardware? If you're in the cloud, it gets a little bit easier. You can spin it up, spin it down, do that type of stuff, right? So, but even if you have 100% identical infrastructure for your QA environment versus your production environment, they're still not identical, because what's different is the load and the traffic, right? That's going to be different, and that's going to make your software run differently in the QA environment versus in the production environment. And we've tried everything, right? We've tried record and playback. We have a lot of infrastructure we can play with. And for instance, when we deploy Azure DevOps services into Azure, it's hosted in Azure, we literally have one ring that is just our playground, right? It is just to deploy new code, test it, make sure everything looks good. But we cannot simulate the amount of traffic that gets generated in the real world. It's just impossible. So if you are already going to be testing in production, wouldn't it be better to test in production in a controlled fashion, where instead of just blasting it to everyone, you open it up just to a tiny bit of the population, let them test it, make sure it looks good. And if it looks good, open it up a little bit more. And if that looks good, open it up a little bit more, until eventually 100% of your user base is using the new code and not the old code. I guess one last thing that I want to say about feature flags is they are incredibly powerful and incredibly useful, but it does come at a price, right? Because like I said, a feature flag is a glorified if statement. So you're adding complexity into your code. Every feature flag that you add, you're adding some complexity. It's an if statement. If you have nested feature flags, it starts becoming complex very, very quickly. So, but for us at Microsoft, what we discovered is that the tax that we have to pay with feature flags, it is far outweighed by the benefits that we gain from having feature flags as well. So any new feature that we write is going to be wrapped up in a feature flag. Any bug fix that we write is going to be wrapped up in a feature flag as well. So that is literally what we do. We do have rules in place as well, which is as soon as you can, you have to clean up your feature flags. You can't just sit there and let them collect. It's super easy for devs to be lazy, right? Because that's what we are. We're just lazy people. It's super easy to be like, oh, we just flip the flag on, and then you forget to clean it. You forget to clean up the code. You forget to clean up your flags. And very, very quickly, your code can spin out of control, and you just have massive amounts of debt. So you have to clean up your flags as soon as you possibly can. But otherwise, feature flags are amazing. The other thing people tell me often is, oh, our app is not designed for feature flags. We can't do it. And I look at them and I say, well, can your app do an if statement? Which of course you can. Everything can do an if statement. And the answer is yes. Well, then you can do feature flags. So even if you've never even thought about implementing feature flags, you can say, let's do feature flags starting with all new features starting today. And it'll still totally work. Like I said, if your app supports an if statement, you can do a feature flag.
That's brilliant. That is so good. Thank you very much. And I can just imagine people kind of pausing the video as you were talking there, writing down all of those incredible nuggets of wisdom. Let's stay with DevOps for multi-tenanted SaaS apps. I'm interested in how you guys do this using the Azure DevOps team. I mean, how do you do DevOps in this area?
So, interesting enough, this is something that I can talk about for an hour. Right? I can even talk about this for like an entire day, but we'll try to do this in a much more abridged version, a quicker version. The first thing that we had to do is we had to change the culture. Like I said, everything starts with the culture. If you think about Microsoft from, let's say, the 2000 to about 2010 timeframe, we were not DevOpsy at all. We were, in fact, very waterfall-like. Every 3 to 4 years, we put a new version of our software out, a new version of Windows, a new version of Office. The team that I was on is the TFS, or Azure DevOps team. So that every 3 or 4 years, it's a new version of TFS. So around the 2010-ish timeframe, what we've noticed is that we were being out-innovated by our competitors by a lot, not just a little bit, by a lot. And they were putting out updates way, way, way faster than we were. So we knew we had to adopt this new mindset, this DevOps mindset, where we are continuously delivering value, not delivering value every 4 years, right? To give you an example of how bad things were, and this is a highly exaggerated example, but it really shows the point, right? I remember, I think this was around the 2010 timeframe, we made some updates to our work item tracking system, and I was really proud of it. I was like, oh, my code is amazing, and well, whatever. So I called up my friends, and I was like, oh, check it out, this is my code, this is so awesome. And my buddy tested it out and said, this is cool, but I found a bug. I'm like, a bug? I don't write bugs, are you crazy? But I looked at it, and it was a bug of mine, so I'm like, all right, fine. So I fixed it really quickly, checked it back in, called up my friend and said, you know what, I fixed it, the bug is checked in, and you can get that fixed in 3 years. Right? Because that was our cadence of when you get the next version of the software. So clearly we had to move quicker. So in order to move quicker, we really had to change our entire corporate mindset. We had to go through the whole DevOps transformation, where we had to move away from Agile. We had to move away from waterfall. We had to move away from a hugely, highly hierarchical management chain, and we had to really flatten things out. We used to have developers in our QA teams. We combined those together and said, you know what, we're no longer going to have developers and QAs. We're just going to have engineers, and you're all going to work together. You know, you're going to have an ops team, and instead of writing our code in layers, like we used to do things. A lot of companies do this, right? We would have a data layer, we would have a UI layer, we would have our back-end layer. We'd have all these different layers and all these different teams. And instead of writing our software that way, we decided to do it vertically, like vertical slices, where each team would be a feature team that owned one entire feature, everything about it, all up, right? They would own the UI layer, they'd own the data layer, they'd own the API layer, they'd own everything. So this way, if they needed to make a change, it was just one team that could quickly make that change. Reason why we changed our QA and our devs and turned them just all into engineers was there was so much frictions between our dev teams and our QA teams. It got so bad that we kind of produced a very toxic environment at Microsoft as well. You know, I was guilty of this, and I didn't mean to, but we still created this, right? I would interview somebody for a position that I have on my team, and I would say things like, oh, that person was pretty good. I don't think they were strong enough to be a developer on my team, but they might be great on the QA team, right? Which I didn't mean anything bad by it, but all of a sudden we started creating this second-class citizenship in Microsoft engineering itself, right? Where we would walk around like we were devs with our chest all puffed out, and we were thinking we were all that, and you know, they're just QA teams, and there's a lot of friction. So we broke down the walls, and we smushed the teams together, and we upskilled everyone. So we taught the QA teams to code, and we taught our developers to worry about quality, which I hated because I didn't want to do anything with quality. I'm a coder. I can't test. I don't want to test. I'm really bad at testing, blah, blah, blah. Everything that we developers say all the time. And Microsoft pretty much looked at me and said, you need to change your attitude. And I told them, no way. I'm not going to change my attitude because I'm right. And then they're like, yeah, you can find another team to be on if you keep on behaving in this fashion. So it's like, okay, maybe I better change my attitude. So then I had to learn how to write quality into my code as opposed to trying to bolt it on after the fact, right? So if you're old like me, the way we used to write code was we would write code, and when you're done, you'd throw it over the fence, give it to the QA team. The QA team, they would find your bugs for you. And by then I'm off doing something else, right? And so some other poor guy would have to come in after me and fix my bug. So I thought my code was great because I never saw my bad code. So instead of doing it that way, where you bolt on quality at the end, we had to write quality into our application as we wrote it. So this was a huge change in mindset. And then how we deployed our application, that became a big thing as well. So Azure DevOps Services, again, every team does things a little bit differently, but the team that I'm most closely associated with is the Azure DevOps Services team. We use Azure DevOps Services ourselves, right? And then we deploy it, and the entire world uses Azure DevOps Services. So this is everybody's source code. This is their build and release pipelines. This is their plans. This. If we go down, other companies that rely on this literally cannot do their business. So we cannot go down. So because of that, we have to be very careful how we deploy our changes. So we implemented something what we call ring deployments, right? Where we would deploy from ring 0 all the way out to ring 5. And then each ring would get bigger and bigger and encompass more and more of our users. So the first ring that we had deployed to is ring 0. And that was really just us in engineering. So we use Azure DevOps Services every single day just to do our job to write Azure DevOps Services. So because of that, we could dog food our newest changes. And so we literally became our own QA team. So we deploy it to ring 0. It would sit in ring 0, which is our engineering team. It would sit there for about 24 to 48 hours. And as it's sitting, we are using it. You know, there's like over 800 developers just all hammering away on this, our engineering team. And if the telemetry shows things are not good, or if there's too many exceptions that are not caught, that can automatically stop that release right then and there. Or if anybody files a blocking bug, that will stop that release right then and there as well. But if everything looks good and nobody flags a blocking bug, it will automatically then go to ring 1. And ring 1 happens to be, who is it? I think it's Brazil. They're ring 1 because they're our smallest scale unit. So lucky them, right? They get it straight from us. And it goes to Brazil, same thing happens, right? Ring 0 or ring 1 sits there for 24 to 48 hours. We're gathering telemetry. We're even looking at social media sentiment really, really carefully. And we have AI bots scanning Twitter. So if all of our Brazilian MVPs on deployment day starts tweeting out things like, what's going on, blah, 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 this sucks, blah, blah, blah. You know, if they start saying things like that, that can literally stop our deployments right then and there as well, right? So again, the idea is we want to deploy it slowly out to more and more people. So if we do something bad, we can roll that out really quickly and we're not affecting the entire world. So if everything looks good in Brazil, 24 to 48 hours, everything looks good, goes on to ring 1, ring 2, and eventually the entire world, right? So that's one of the things that we do is we deploy very, very carefully using our reading deployments. The other thing that we do is what I covered as well is massive use of feature flags. I cannot emphasize how important that is and how that has given us the flexibility and allows us to move at speed.
So many amazing bits of wisdom there. This is gold. Thank you so much, Abel. Where would you recommend that ISVs start their DevOps journey? There'll be people watching this thinking that what you're sharing is fantastic, but sometimes it's hard to just make the start.
It is hard. There are some good books that I can recommend. I don't have them on me, but I can send them to you as a link, and then we can bring them up. There are some really good DevOps people to follow, like Donovan Brown, right? An amazing Microsoft personality that talks DevOps all the time. You can follow my team at Microsoft on Twitter. You can follow us from the League of Extraordinary Cloud DevOps Advocates, which is the most ridiculous name ever. But again, we have lots of DevOps wisdom that we drop all the time. And again, if you have questions, you can tweet at us as well on Twitter. We will see it and we will answer your questions. as well, right? So we are a resource. Please, please, please do use us. One of the things when people start talking to me about a DevOps transformation, what I usually tell people is, don't try to bite off too much all at once, right? Don't try to do everything all at once. Really, the best way to do it is to find one thing. Find the thing that hurts the most and fix that one thing for that iteration. At the end of your iteration, end of your sprint, take a look back and say, hey, did we fix it? Is it better? If it's better, hooray for that. Can we make that thing better? If we can, for the next iteration, let's do that. And if it's great, let's find the next thing that hurts and fix that. So you just fix things slowly, one at a time. If you try to do everything at once, that's too much, and it's just too much. It's going to fall apart.
Yeah, that's awesome. Abel Wang, thank you so much for your time today. This is like King Solomon's mine of information for DevOps, and you, my friend, are King Solomon. It's just been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is an exciting new series that we're doing on successful ISVs and how their partnership with Microsoft has helped their business to succeed.
I'm finding it an amazing space where Microsoft can introduce us to elements of the market that we wouldn't have been able to get access to before.
Microsoft relationship, it's not only been about technical support, but really helping us frame up that productization piece as well.
It's an amazing relationship. I'm really blown away. I wish they could come to every meeting that I go to.
Well, there you go. Thank you very much, Abel.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. That was great. That was really, really good. I think we got probably a little bit more content, but that's all right. I think after we take out all the pauses and stuff that we had in the beginning, we should be pretty much on point.
Yeah, I can talk about this for hours.
I know, it felt like it. I was like, that last question, I was like, oh, I hope he doesn't talk too long because we might have to cut it out. That was well done.
I'm sure you can always run a long session. I mean, hey, it's there's just so much gold in there. I think there's not this stuff we just don't want to lose. I mean, all that stuff around the feature flags and all that sort of stuff. We just love to see our